Isn't it wild when in adulthood you start to become aware that probably a majority, if not all, of the relationships that you've held throughout your entire life, both platonic and romantic, have been exceedingly dysfunctional, toxic, and unhealthy? But previously, you saw it all as normal. You saw it all as that's just the way that relationships go, right? I mean, it was modeled for you. It was, right? And you're just mirroring that which was modeled for you. Let's talk about survival in childhood. And when I say that, I don't mean parents teaching a child how to survive. No. What I mean is children being raised in dysfunctional environments where they then develop defense mechanisms or even, you know, maladaptive behaviors that are, I guess we'll say, required to survive the environment, right? It's a very interesting dynamic of how this works. And the more I heal and the more I look at, you know, all of the dynamics of everything that I've learned, the more I look at dysfunctional childhoods, I didn't previously know that the way that things were, right, were dysfunctional and unhealthy. I didn't know that survival was survival. I didn't. And of course, no names. I won't do that. I don't mention that kind of stuff. Boundaries, right? But there's a difference between a healthy childhood, right, where unhealthy defense mechanisms and even maladaptive behaviors that can lead to things like personality disorders, um, those things are not present in a healthy environment, in a healthy childhood. What is present is boundaries that are taught, healthy individuation and differentiation from an early age, right? And then, of course, growing with that, learning that, and then developing into a healthy adult and all that kind of stuff. But this video is really just the recognition that, previously, before I started doing my own work and everything, um, everything that was dysfunctional, toxic, and unhealthy that I had rationalized and validated and normalized, which continued to further lead to more of the fucked upness of my own experiences of life, right? I didn't know that that was unhealthy. You know, when you see fucked up behavior happen, when you see dysfunctional, boundaryless behavior happen, and that just ends up being normalized, you don't really question it. But the fascinating thing is that when an adult that experienced those fucked up dynamics in childhood enters adulthood and is unaware of what survival is, right? Survival meaning how you respond as an infant or a toddler or a child to fucked up dynamics, which then lead you to develop these defense mechanisms that are unhealthy, um, or, in and of itself, maladaptive behaviors, right? You don't know any better. And until you become aware of what's actually happening, you probably won't know any better, right? But the wild thing is the continuing to live in these dynamics of survival because you still don't know any different, right? And not only that, but let's dive into the being repulsive to not only healthy objects, meaning healthy people, but also healthy relationships, right? To somebody that is unhealthy, somebody that was raised in a chaotic and dysfunctional environment that is still living in survival, healthy people and healthy relationships might even make somebody want to vomit, right? Yeah, living in survival in adulthood is wild, especially when you continue to believe that that's just the way that relationships are. Oh, I've always been this way, so I'll probably always be this way. Oh, they've always been that way, so they'll probably always continue to be that way. It doesn't make it healthy, you know? And, continuing to live in survival, fight, flight, freeze, fawn, based on the dysfunctional, fucked up dynamics of the FOO, the foo, right? We're still fighting the foo, the family of origin, right? To just continue to have that normalized is wild, right? Survival is survival. I'm going to call it for what it is. It's not normal. It's not healthy. It's not whatever you think it is. It's not, oh, that's just the way that things have been and that's just the way that things are. Yeah, in a dysfunctional upbringing, right? In a psychosomatic upbringing, right? Shout out to Salvador Minuchin. I believe he was the one that coined the term enmeshment. It's very fascinating to be in adulthood and to be aware of the fucked upness that previously was not in my awareness, right? Um, Consistently living in survival, which is fight, flight, freeze, fawn, which was the dynamic that was learned in the dysfunctional childhood, right? With people, objects that were chosen by me in a lesser conscious awareness state to reinforce, to further reinforce and continue to reinforce the fucked upness of dynamics, right? That was then, this is now. And that's just the reality of it, right? More of a state of conscious awareness of self and of other and of dynamics is crucially important. I can't emphasize it enough. But when you're still living in survival in adulthood, which I see all the time, I've learned enough to know what the fuck is going on. I've learned enough to know the difference between a healthy, regulated nervous system and an unhealthy, dysregulated nervous system. Be able to spot them, understand. I I might not know about what happened in their fucking life, but I know enough to be able to tell, yeah, right? Survival is not normal or healthy. It's the result of a dysfunctional life early on, right? And to choose to continue to live in that state, it's a choice. You can do it, right? You can absolutely do it. You'll continue to attract more of the same fucked up objects with all of their fucked upness, their marring and their scathing and everything, right? I've experienced anxiety. I've experienced panic attacks. I have. I have. I know what it's like in my own experience. I guess everyone's experience is different. Um, but I really don't anymore. And that's a result of doing the work and understanding my fucked upness. Um, you know, based on what fucked me up, of course. But when you're still in adult, or when you're in adulthood and you're still in survival, there's something there. The freeze, sorry, I'll say it in the order that I like to. The fight, flight, freeze, fawn defense mechanisms, they may have kept you safe, safe in a dysfunctional childhood, but they're not going to continue to serve you as they previously did. And in healthy, regulated environments and systems, that kind of stuff doesn't take place. You're not expected to, I'll end on this note, you're not expected to be anybody other than who you are. You're not encouraged to be anybody other than who you are. You're not told that you can't be this way or that way, right? Getting into, I believe it is Jungian, Carl Jung, Jungian psychology, the shadow self, right? These parts of ourselves that we abandon and we neglect. So then what is it that you're really putting out there in your adult relationships? You know, like if you had an unhealthy childhood, right? If you had if you experienced fucked up dynamics and you learned these defense mechanisms of fight, flight, freeze, fawn, not only just that, but you also learned to abandon parts of yourself to be loved because you couldn't fully be yourself, right? Because boundaries weren't present. You know, the parent was like, oh, that's the child's stuff. I'm going to let the child develop in that, right? You weren't allowed to do that. So therefore you started cutting these parts of yourself off, right? Chuck it out there. And over time, you were left with pieces of yourself, fragments of yourself, right? So then, if you just continue to live based on that and you bring that into adulthood, what are you really presenting yourself with? What are you really presenting other people with? Right? I mean, self comes first, of course. You really need to know yourself, you know? I mean, again, you don't have to know yourself, but the difference between knowing yourself and not knowing yourself are fucking night and day. That's just the reality of it. And that's a big thing too. Shadow self, fragments of the self that we've abandoned, being raised, you know, with friends, with people in our lives. Whatever the objects are, they were unhealthy. They further reinforced that belief that we need to be somebody else or that whoever it is that we are is unacceptable and we need to get rid of that. It's not healthy. It's not. Being surrounded by people that don't accept you as you are, which further reinforce your need to continue living in survival, fight, flight, freeze, fawn, shadow self stuff, all these fragments. Who are you at that point? You know, and what is it that you're really bringing to the table for yourself, and as well as your relationships? That's survival. That's survival in adulthood. Doesn't have to be that way.